And now, a passage from Etiquette for Americans, Chapter 3, Calling. After introductions, visits, as we commonly term them in this country, calls come next in preliminary sequence. To make a call has an inelegant robustness of tone to one not used to hearing it. But Americans cannot plead that they are not used to hearing it. And the expression is not only general, but universal here. Paying visits, the neat substitute for the rougher phrase, is not yet in colloquial use. Visiting or calling hours are now limited, and most sensibly, to a restricted time in the afternoon. No one not privileged on pressing business or extremely intimate would think of invading a household before 3 o'clock. And as it is only of formal visiting we are speaking, running in to friends or neighbors' houses familiarly need not be mentioned in connection with the subject. So great a nuisance did the old-fashioned habit of callers, of spreading themselves there on whole days, some people calling in the mornings, others in the afternoons, still others evenings, and all on any day in the week, become that the custom of restricting hours to certain parts of days and then to certain days of the week was started in self-preservation, and now, in large cities, is general. No one can be offended who is refused at 2:30 on a Tuesday when Monday's 3 to 6 is plainly engraving on a carte de visite. The hostess, on the other hand, who excuses herself within these limits, will find it hard to make her peace with disgusted visitors who have stretched a point to conform to restrictions made by the offender herself. It is a good rule to stay only 15 minutes at a formal, at any rate a first call, unless, of course, urged to stay longer for some special reason. It is an equally good rule to depart as the room becomes crowded and talking grows more difficult, at all events to relinquish one's place near the hostess. Tea is universally served on calling days in all well-regulated houses, but if you are obliged to go very early, say at 3 o'clock, it is good form to decline the offer of tea made specially for you, not only because of the unseasonable hour, but because it makes a great deal of trouble. This sounds like superfluous advice, but most persons who go out calling much will relate at least one instance of some absent-minded female who, straying in without regard to the time, accepts the offer of tea at 3 o'clock, waits till it comes in, and then departs finding how early it is, without drinking a drop. Of such is the kingdom of callers. Little speeches are now ruled out pretty generally in the routine of calling. It is foolish to pretend that calling is more than routine, and the more quietly one enters and the more unobtrusively departs, the better pleased will the hostess be. Above all, don't keep her standing an hour while you lecture or orate or go over somebody's history while everybody else sits about looking foolish. Put your card on a convenient place in the hall or on the tray the servant holds out for you, and mention your name to the manservant if there is one. A man or a maid usually takes the card on a tray and stands holding the curtains, perhaps, aside for you to enter, speaking your name audibly at the same time. Sending or taking the card in before you to the drawing room on afternoons is obsolete. A man does exactly the same as a woman, except that he takes off his overcoat if he wears one in the hall. His hat and stick he also deposits outside. This rule is not generally observed, but should be. The drawing room is no place for the hat, and of course the hat and stick go and stay together. A man in this country must be asked to call before he may venture to do so. To take away the awkwardness or suspicion of forwardness from such an act, it may be stated that a lady usually knows when a gentleman wishes to call, and if he has been out of his way to be civil to her, she is safe in asking him. He then calls as soon as possible after the invitation is given. After that, if it is a family of much entertaining, he will receive, if his visit has been agreeable, an invitation to dinner. After that, again, he calls within a week, and then he may be summoned for informal occasions, etc. He is an acquaintance. This rule is not for young girls, whose mothers must do the asking. Businessmen cannot pay visits very easily in the afternoons. In these days, however, a man on an ordinary weekday is allowed to call in a brown, blue, or any colored coat, fancy waistcoat, and derby hat, and he can be admitted up to 6 o'clock. He therefore will usually be able to find half an hour out of the week. And there is always Sunday. Few houses are closed to visitors Sunday afternoons. There is really no excuse for men's delinquencies, especially, and above all, if they have accepted invitations or favors of any sort from ladies. In dealing with the subject of visiting in general, the receiving party is always a woman, of course. Men receive visits from men at their club or their offices, and in England, and now possibly in New York, there is a distinct etiquette for these ceremonies. And in that respect of amenities between men, we should do well to learn from our British cousins. The slapdash and freedom of many men's friendly calls in business offices is disgusting and without palliation. No decent man has a right to see a stranger in his shirt sleeves, with his hat on and his feet on the table. In England, a man would no more keep his hat on in another man's office than in his wife's drawing room. And it would be well if that one formality were observed and enforced here. But as for formal visiting among men, it is never done at their houses if they are married. That is to say, it is always the wife who receives, not the husband. He goes out, if he has any sense, and makes calls himself. For we have borrowed another sensible custom from England, and that is that when a gentleman, no matter if he is married, has received hospitality at a lady's hands, he is quite capable of paying a visit to show his personal appreciation. It is not necessary for a man to relegate all the visiting to his wife. The imposing and important question of its being necessary to call, and thus return your own visit after a 5 o'clock tea or at home, is not mooted in communities where there is any knowledge of society modes. But as in some small towns and some large cities, of provincial experience only, the point is everlastingly being raised, it may as well be said once and for all that it is an utter absurdity to feel obliged to make one call after another. The rash person who issues 800 invitations to a tea has 800 calls to return. And if she does not know this simple fact, she has been more than rash. She has been ignorant. An exception may be made, as it always is made in any case, for that matter, in favor of old or delicate ladies who cannot return 800 calls. And sometimes, when the hostess makes a special occasion of a tea and has a set program of music. But even then, calling again is a gratuitous civility, and by no means expected. You announce that you will be at home between certain hours. Your friends in walking costume wait upon you. In the words of a slang phrase, it is up to you, and yours is the next move. Nothing excuses delay in returning a first visit within a few days but going out of town or illness. Nothing can be taken in place of a call after a dinner, a luncheon, a supper, or theater party unless, as said before, you are ill or out of town. A card may be sent with a word of regret, and nothing is as easy, really, as attention of this kind, which invariably pleases the recipient. Club life and bicycling and many other informal matters have modified the obligation of persons who meet constantly, but it is always better to overdo the polite than to underdo it, and to call after each and every act of civility is a neat courtesy for a woman to pay and indispensable for a man. The custom of turning up or down corners of cards is no longer followed, nor is it considered necessary for a card to be left for each member of a large family except on most formal occasions. Ladies who drive when they pay visits usually have a very heavy wrap on in cold weather, which they leave in the carriage. But when walking in a thick jacket, it is allowable, more comfortable, and certainly healthier to take it off in the hall. Sending cards by footmen is not an American custom and has no precedent in this country and no excuse. It is one thing to copy foreign form when it is sensible, and another to ape it without reason. Leaving other people's cards is a rather precarious business and done at the caller's risk. It is not pleasant to meet your hostess driving in just as you sail out with the consciousness of having done a good stroke for a friend. In case the returning householder makes inquiries and finds only one visit has been paid, there may be no particular harm done, but that depends upon the sensitiveness of the lady. An abomination that has been done away with in large cities is the evening call. In small communities where dinner is early and the engagements of a whole set are well known, the evening call holds its own and possibly fills the requirements better than if it were made in the busy hours of day. But for those who can conform to late hours for dinner and dinner parties, the evening visit is an impossibility, or ought to be. It is a great nuisance at any rate. The visitor breaks into a dinner, it may be, or intercepts the family just starting for the theater, or for a dinner party at another house if he calls as early as 8 o'clock. Only intimate friends are allowed to call in the evenings in circles where the conventionalities are observed. And it is for such that our humble suggestions are intended. Yet many and many a man lays himself open to strictures he does not otherwise deserve, by appearing at the house of a mere acquaintance when it is most inconvenient to receive him. The system of calling is one that wastes much time, and is rather senseless. But there seems to be no other institution to take its place. And as a code of signals, it has its uses. Without it, it is difficult to see how lists would be recruited for invitations, or any entertaining done in order. Hi Americana is bringing you the most unique and eclectic content you aren't going to find anywhere else. So if you enjoy this content, please head on over to Patreon to support the channel. The goal is to make this a full-time job. Thank you.